Thank you for joining me at Model Car Building and Retirement. My name is Ken. This is going to be the first of a 5-part series on how to get a show car finish on your model car. Before I get into that, I wanted to get into the quality of my productions a little bit. As time allows, time and budget allows, I'm going to be upgrading my camera and microphone setup. Right now I'm just using an iPhone. And software-wise, too, I'm using a free editing software, but there's better stuff out there. In fact, I did upgrade once already, but unfortunately it wasn't very compatible and it kept freezing up. So I'm still on the search for that. But bear with me on the quality. I am shooting in 1080i right now, but I'm hoping to get to 4K here shortly. Another thing is I notice I say a lot, and I stumble for words. You know, I'm new to being in front of a camera, and I'm trying my best there. I am going to work as hard as I can to try to cut down on that. Sorry if that annoys you, and if it does, I'm sincerely apologize. I'll try. I vow to get better at that. Anyways, for this first part of the series, we're going to show you how to paint, and basically there's 10 points to this this series of videos. First is going to be gathering and preparing your parts for paint, period. Second is the equipment needed. Third, we're going to go on to spraying the primer. And then we're going to go into sanding and preparing for color. And then we're going to go into the mixing of the paint, spraying the color, preparing for clear coat, mixing the urethane 2K clear, and spraying the clear. And then finally wet sand and polish. So in this video, we're going to cover preparation of the parts all the way through primer. Stay tuned. Okay, so for this painting tutorial, I chose the 1965 Chevy Impala by Revell. This is the Foose Designs Edition, and this can also be built bone stock. I'm probably going to go with the Foose Designs because it'll be just something different here. Caught my eye when I was at Hobby Lobby the other day. So let's get that out of the way. Now the first thing you're going to do is you're going to select your parts for paint. And of course on the 1967 kit, really there's only 2 items. There's the hood and the body here that would be body color. If you did want to do the engine compartment, you would get that area stuff out too, but I'm going to paint that black. When you get a brand new kit out of the box, you're going to inspect your body because there's going to be items that need to be addressed before you go into paint. Typically there are some mold lines and areas that need attention. And don't know if you can really see it here, but right at the end of the drip rails, right there on both sides, there is some areas that need addressed. It's got like a mold line there. Not bad. Little bit in the back here, a little bit of flashing, not much. Tops of the fenders, that's usually a separation area here. So these are really sharp. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to, I'm marking them with a pen so I know where to sand here. But we're just going to, and back ones too. And we're just going to sand those areas down a little bit to smooth them over because when you are painting, the paint mills will gather kind of thick on flat areas here. But when you get to an edge like this, if you don't dress this first, that paint is going to have very little area to adhere to. So when you come to sanding or polishing or anything, it's not going to take much to just wipe the paint right off of the top of that fender. So what we need to do is just kind of sand that down a little bit. We're also going to take a look at the window trim here and do a little bit of a rescribing of the trunk lines and the door lines, because even though you can see them now, by the time you prime sand, color sand, 2K urethane sand and polish, you're going to be filling those gaps little by little along the entire way. And we want to show off those door gaps because that's part of the realistic look of a car. So I'm going to start sanding. Some of the tools I'm going to be using here is, got some 800 grit wet sandpaper. I got some Trizact 5000 wet sandpaper. Very good stuff. I highly recommend this. I got some various files out, little sanding board and foam backed sanding pieces here. Just various tools for sanding, and scriber And I'm going to put links for most of the stuff that we have here in the description. But this is a little scriber made by, I'm going to try to pronounce that, I think it's urethane. And this comes with multiple blades. This here happens to be a 0.3 millimeter. And that's pretty perfect for doing window trim and door scribing. And I also have this, which I found in my junk drawer from many years ago, so I'm not sure where I got it from. But I like this too for a little bit of scribing, because it is difficult to scribe those lines sometimes. You got to be very careful. So we're going to get into sanding and scribing, and we'll be right back. Okay, so starting with my 800 grit, I have a little tub of water nearby, and I'm just going to start rounding off these corners. Not a lot of pressure on the paper. Just rubbing back and forth, letting the sandpaper do the work. And you'll feel when that is smoothed over. We're just about there. It doesn't take long because it's just so thin and sharp. Okay, so we're going to do that on all four fender tops here. And then we're also going to work on that little mold line right there and sand that away. I'll do that off camera just to save a little time on the camera or on the video. And another thing I noticed is that usually the door handles are molded into the model. In this case, it is not. So on the chrome tree are separately applied little door handles as well as the mirrors. So what I did is there was no location pinning or anything in place where you could glue those two. You're going to have to just be precise with your glue and hope that you can hold it in place till your glue dries. Otherwise, you're going to make a mess of your paint. So I'm using the pinning method. So I put a little rod in my door handle and a little hole in the door here. So I'll have a positive pin location, and I did the same with the mirror. And if you haven't done so already, watch my video on pinning. It'll be very helpful to you. Okay, so we're going to sand that, sand all those, and then I'm going to go to my 5000 Tremec Trizac paper, and I'm just going to lightly rub and sand the entire roof, just to scuff that super shiny plastic down a little bit to give the paint and primer a little something to adhere to. And then also going to use my little scribers, and I'm going to rescribe all my little door lines here. I will put a video up on that scribing shortly, but essentially what you're doing is you're just rescribing a little bit deeper on all your molded in body panel lines, so that once you put a little buildup of paint in there, you could still highlight these. Also going to do that around here because I do plan on bare metal foiling. I want to make sure that that's pronounced enough. So going to do that off camera as well. I will get a video up on scribing down the road here. But let me get this all prepped and we'll be right back. Okay, through the magic of editing, what took an instant for you took me about 45 minutes to an hour. But I now have that body all prepped for paint. So what I did is I used my 800 sandpaper on all the edges of the fenders that were a little bit sharpened. I also used that around where the mold line was at the back of the drip rails and to remove any flashing throughout. I also test fit the hood. Make sure you do that because the hood did fit awfully tight, and by the time you add paint and everything, that would have been an extremely tight fitment. So I did go around and I sanded all the edges of my hood to just thin that out a little bit. Okay. Went over the panel lines, the door lines and the trunk lines, where the gaps are going to be, because I definitely want those pronounced. A lot of modelers do not address the panel lines for the doors and the trunk lids and whatnot. I like to get them really defined. I like to get them, I'll dress them with a little bit of accent color, panel line accent color at the end to give them a little bit of a darkened appearance. Go out in your driveway and look at your car in the sunlight or in the shade, and you're going to see dark around every one of those little door gaps. A lot of people miss that, but it goes a long ways on making an authentic looking model. Also, the window trim, if you plan on doing a bare metal foil, these were poorly defined. This kit has probably been repopped under different variations over the years, so the molds get a little bit worn out. The tooling, I guess they call it. And the window trim was not very well defined. So if you're going to do bare metal foil, as you know, you need to run a X-Acto blade number 11 along your foil to cut along the edges. Well, it was barely defined now, so by the time we get primer, color, urethane on there, we were going to lose that definition. So I carefully, about 5 to 10 passes with my scriber on every panel, just lightly going across 5-10 times. You could feel the material coming off. Then I took this entire model. I did drill my pinning locations. Then I took the entire model to the kitchen sink and I washed it in Dawn dish soap just to get rid of all my sanding marks and dust and wet sandpaper debris. I used a toothbrush to make sure that the gaps and panel lines are very clean and there's no shavings of plastic in those. So this is actually ready to paint. I want to talk about another nice little tool here. You don't have to do this, but this is a nice little stand. I'll have a link in the description. I'm sorry, lost for words there. I'll have a link in the description, but this is a very nice little stand. You could use old rattle can, paint can, hold your model, you know, anything that's gonna be able to fit this gap in here, cardboard box, whatever. But I like this little stand. It has adjustable jaws where you can bring out the spring tension tighter or looser as you need to. But essentially, you just squeeze these two little wires in here, get that inside your body, make sure it's nice and snug. And it comes on a little turntable. Some people will put that in their booth and spin it around like that. I like to leave the stand just outside my booth. And then I will just handle the model like this in my booth. I feel I got a lot more control. I can get paint on the, you know, the bottom edges and whatnot. But just in case you were interested, you can get that. I'll have that link in the description. And the final thing before I do go to painting is this is a anti-static brush. There'll be a link for this in the description as well. But this is a great little item, just to make sure you don't have any dust on your model, because it's impossible not to have something when you paint. But all the precautions in the world. This little brush, just brush over the entire car. And then I take really good care of my brush. I never lay it down without putting my cover back up on there. Okay, so this is all ready to go. If I did not mention it for the panel or the pinning, which, like I said, I have a different video on, but this is a little pin vise drill. I'll have a link for that in the description too. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about equipment and the paint, primer paints, and then we'll get off to the booth here shortly. Okay, so next up we're going to talk a little bit about the equipment. I use a entry-level, cheaper brand, Gallarhi 39 airbrush. This is available from Gallarhi, or you can get it on Amazon for about $45 if you have Amazon Prime, and I will have a link to that in the description. But I get professional results with this. Now you can spend upwards over $100 for an airbrush, but I have not found the need to. The biggest trick is taking care of it and keeping it clean per the instructions. This is not going to be a tutorial about airbrushes, but I wanted to cover some of the basics. So what you get in the package is a quick disconnect for your air compressor. Now you do have to have a separate air compressor. You could buy it off of Amazon or Gallarhi. The one I have is probably about 50 years old. I don't even remember where I bought it. I think I bought it from Badger many years ago, but it's just a small little air compressor. You can use any air compressor. What you need is a little regulator and a water separator. And the regulator is important because most of the product I'm going to be shooting is relatively low, about 18 psi. Now this is a two-stage airbrush, so as you push down on this lever, you're delivering air from your compressor right out the tip. When you pull back, which is the second function of the two-stage, that's allowing paint to come from your paint cup and go out the front and be propelled by the air. And depending on how far you throttle back, I don't know if you can see this needle. This needle's pulling back. So when it's pulled back all the way, it's delivering full paint. Now, it's very important when you're airbrushing is to keep your air on at all times. Don't stop like this when you're painting. Keep that air on. And you can throttle. Now, you can let off the throttle when you don't need paint, but keep this on And then when you need paint, you just pull back. And some of our coats are going to be light, and then some of ours are going to be wet. Now wet, you're going to pull nearly all the way back, if not all the way back. But when I say a light coat, we're probably going to be throttled maybe about 50%. One nice thing about this airbrush is this back lever, you can turn it clockwise, and that is like a throttle control. That'll stop that earlier. In case you don't have the good finger discipline, you can throttle this back in the back here, and it'll control how far back you can go, which is good for a beginner. I do prefer to keep it wide open so I can control it from here. Now this comes with a .35 needle and tip and a 0.5 millimeter tip, and that comes in handy. The .35 is much finer, and you're going to get a finer spray pattern, which is great for your base coat and your urethane 2-stage clear coats. And then the 0.5 millimeter is for your thicker paints, like your primer, some of your acrylics, and black acrylic is like thick because it's so heavily pigmented. So the 0.5 millimeter is good for thicker paints, the 0.35 for finishing work. Just be sure that when you do change them out, you change the tip and the needle at the same time. The kit comes with 2 different size cups. It comes with your spare needle and tip. Comes with a little bit of lube for lubing the plunger here, and a lid for your cup. I don't use the lid because I like to keep tabs on where I am on paint, because if I am midway through a body, I wouldn't start the body until I knew I had enough paint in there, and we'll kind of cover that on the videos. So that's a little update on the brushes that we're going to be using. Okay, so we're at the spray booth. I want to cover just a couple more things before we get started on the primer. First of all, I highly recommend this little pot and holder for your airbrush. I'll have a link in the description, got that off of Amazon, but it's a perfect place to hold your brush and be able to fill your cup. I usually keep it just outside to the right of my booth, and it has a little filter on top so that when you're squirting your thinners in there to clean it, you would just stick it in that hole and spray, and it'll all collect in the bottom there. It has a little filter to cut down on the fumes. So I highly recommend that. Another thing is these little holders, alligator clips with wires on them. I'll have a link in the description. I think I buy them in a pack of 40s, but this is great for your little small details, for mirrors and valances and steering wheels and little things that you're going to be painting. And they do sell a stand to put them in. I just took a piece of scrap wood and drilled some holes in there to space out the parts a little bit. Now on the hood, for example, there's no place to really clip that to, because there's no sprue attachment or anything. So I just use one of these clips and just tape to the back of it, and that's going to hold that quite well. So I will keep this just outside the booth as well. Now the actual primer that I'm using is MCW Finishes Light Gray Lacquer Primer number 1004. You can buy that right off their website or at Hobby Lobby, or not Hobby Lobby, but Hobby Nut Models sells their line of products as well. I believe it's about $6. You can usually get about 2 bodies out of this, and this is a primer that is all mixed up and ready to spray out of the airbrush. You do not need to dilute that. You don't need to add anything to that. And the reason for the primer and a lacquer primer is that since the enamels I'm going to be spraying is a solvent-based enamel, these the lacquer is going to kind of etch and protect that plastic and create a barrier so that the hot solvents that you're using during your paint process don't hurt and have an adverse effect with your model. There are other primers out there, but with my MCW line, I like to stay with the same product line. So I'm going to use this, their colors, and they're clear throughout this process. So this is ready to go. There's a little ball bearing in there. So you just shake it up real good till you hear the ball, spin it around, whatnot. You can turn it upside down and see if anything is still solid there. And if you really need to get the big guns out, you can get one of those little Badger battery powered stirrers, which will help that too. So we're going to fill up the bowl, turn on the booth, and get going. One last thing is the lacquer does stink quite a bit, puts out quite a bit of fumes, so I'm going to be wearing a respirator. I'll try to talk and narrate through the video with that, If it comes out real bad, I'll have to do voiceovers on the final edit, but we'll give it a go. All right, on my airbrush, I switched over to my 0.5 millimeter needle and tip, and I'm going to be running about 18 psi on my pressure, and I'm going to be doing overlaps of about 50% with a nice wet coat. I'm going to do 2 wet coats on the hood and the body, and for the primer, that should be good enough. I'm also going to use a spoon when I first start out. I like to spray the back of a spoon because if your gun's acting up and doing weird things and going to spit something bad out or whatever, I'd rather happen on something like that instead of the critical model. So we're going to get started, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm going to fill my airbrush with the primer, and I use these little plastic pipettes. I buy them in bulk, like 200 pieces at a time, relatively cheap. I'll have a link in the description, but I'll just draw up my primer and fill my bowl. Okay, so first up, I'm gonna test out my airbrush here and put 2 nice little wet coats on my spoon. And I used a light up from above to check my coverage. That's going to tell me how I'm laying out my paint. If I'm going too far apart between my passes, I can tighten it up. If I'm loading it up too much, I can back off and slow down. But I watch the paint lay on, and I'm watching the reflection in the lights, if that helps you at all. I'm about 3 inches away as I paint, and I keep my air on all times, and then I pull back for my paint. On a wet coat, I go full throttle back, but you got to be careful not to hold in one place too long or you'll run. But the one forgiving thing about the lacquer primer is it does dry relatively quick, and you can do some sanding at work or whatnot. Get my first coat on my hood. I'm going to start the bottom edges first. Now that tape is in the way. I'll go back and I'll paint that bottom later. No big deal. All right, wet coat. Nice little overlapping passes. You can see it going on. A little bit dry. I'll go a little wetter on my next coat. Okay, gonna get a second coat on that hood. As you can see, that dries really quick. That's only been a few seconds. Gonna get a nice wet coat on there. I'm gonna start the bottom again. Get my edges. All right, now a nice wet coat with overlapping passes. Okay, and look, and I got a fairly good reflection there in the light. The primer dries very quick. I'm gonna go a little wetter. I'll go crossways this time. But I don't know if you can see the light reflection, but that's telling me how well my coverage is laying down. Not so critical on primer, but it gets very important when you go into color and clear coat. So that hood is done. That's got 2 good wet coats on there, 2.5. Okay, now we're going to start on the body. And I'm going to go about 3/4 throttle here on my paint and just catch the bottom edges first and the front edges. Inside that wheel well, the rocker. All the bottom edges, all the hard to get to edges. Just to make sure I get good coverage, cover it all. This light gray is not real contrasting with the white, so you may have a little trouble seeing it go on there. And I'm going to catch the inside areas there. Inside the roof. Okay, now we're going to start out with our wet passes. 50% overlap. You could do the hood and trunk separately. I should have, but it's okay. I'm going to turn around and take off right from where I left off at the top there. Watching in the reflection, I'm watching that paint lay on. And I ran out of paint. Be right back. That 0.5 millimeter tip really goes through the paint there. All right, I'm gonna continue on. I'm watching that paint go on and I'm using the reflection to help me. Roll it all the way over and make sure I get all the way to the bottom edges. Now I hit the front, tops of the fenders, the cowl area, the back. Now, it's a little spotty on that trunk, so I'm going to hit that trunk again. Okay, so that's the first wet coat. It's all pretty much covered in gray. You look the model over to see if you missed anything. It all looks pretty good. All right, I am going to just top off my bowl one more time, and that'll be enough to give me enough to paint that last second wet coat. Okay, that was only probably 30 seconds there. That lacquer is already like non-shiny, which is good. That means it's flashing really quick here. So we're going to go our second wet coat, making sure that we keep the paint on during the entire pass. Keep the air on at all times. I'm going to hit the roof separately this time. And now the trunk. Turn it around and take over where I left off. Catch my fenders again. I have a fan running outside the booth so I can get away without my mask, but it is kind of blowing my paint around a little bit. Okay, so that is 2 wet coats. That is good to go. We're going to let that dry up for about 12 hours minimum before we go into looking at it to see if we have any dust on it, any light sanding or whatnot before we go to paint. So we'll be right back. Okay, so it's only been a couple minutes out of the booth, and this lacquer dries really quick. It is not dry enough to sand or handle or anything, but you can literally touch it at this point. So the lacquers dry really quick. But if you notice now, you can see a lot of the detail that you couldn't notice when it was in styrene. So this is a good time to really inspect your model. We're going to look for any dust, hairs, any sanding stuff that we missed earlier, because it's much more pronounced now. And all in all, though, it looks pretty good. So the little prep work that's going to take before going to color, we will cover in part 2 of our 5-part series, so stay tuned. Okay, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of our 5-part painting series, and part 2 will be coming out very shortly, and be sure to watch to the end. Thank you very much, and if you do like my content, please like, subscribe, and comment below, and ring that little bell icon. That way you're alerted to my next videos. Thank you.